I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. The confrontation, the revelation, the thing at the end of the road. But nothing prepares you for being watched by something that never blinked. The darkness wasn't empty, it was intentional. A space cleared just for me. And in it, certainty stared back. 6 eyes. Not glowing. Not burning. Observing. I had never been afraid of monsters. Monsters rage. Monsters hunger. Monsters can be fought. This thing didn't threaten. It didn't move. It understood. Every mistake I'd ever made suddenly felt catalogued, measured, filed away as data. Fear didn't come from what it might do to me. Fear came from the realization that it already knew the outcome. And I was just catching up. I wasn't standing before an enemy. I was standing before a conclusion. When the emergency lights flickered on, reality didn't return. It hesitated. The room came back in fragments. Edges first, then depth. Like the universe was rendering this moment on limited processing power. And there he was. Not fully solid. Not fully abstract. Geometry folded where anatomy should have been. Angles bent inward, outward, impossibly. Looking at him made my eyes ache. Like my brain refused to accept the math. I'd chased gods through broken timelines. I'd watched worlds collapse under equations gone wrong. But this was different. Seraph wanted to rule the future. This being had designed it. Reality didn't behave around him. It negotiated. And I understood something terrifying. If he decided I didn't belong in this moment would simply stop including me. Nova stopped mid-step. No warning. No struggle. One instant she was breathing. The next, she was a still frame. Eyes wide. Fear trapped forever behind glass. Time didn't break. It obeyed. I felt it then, the difference between violence and authority. He didn't attack her. Didn't restrain her. He edited her out of progression. The air grew heavy. Sound dulled. Even my heartbeat felt quieter, like it was afraid to be noticed. I realized I was the only one still moving. Not because I was stronger. Because I was unfinished. Nova wasn't frozen because she was weak. She was frozen because she was inconvenient. And in that moment, I understood the rules of this encounter. Resistance wasn't punished. Irrelevance was. Dust hung in the air like stars pinned to invisible wire. A scream died halfway to existence. The world had been paused, not stopped, not shattered. Paused. A bookmark placed in reality. I could walk, breathe, think. But everything else was held in suspension, waiting for permission. He turned time into a private room. A conversation where only 2 voices mattered. That was the most terrifying part. Not the power. The casualness of it. As if halting existence was no more difficult than closing a door. I wondered how many worlds had ended like this. Quietly, politely. While he decided what was worth keeping. And I realized something else. If I said the wrong thing here, there wouldn't be a fight. There would be a correction. He moved without crossing space. One moment he was behind me. The next, everywhere. The room stretched, folded, repeated itself. Like it couldn't decide which version of distance applied to him. Then came the question. Not spoken aloud, not exactly, but pressed directly into thought. Do you know why I chose you? I already hated the answer. Because the question itself was a lie. Choice implies preference, interest, curiosity. This wasn't selection. This was inevitability revealing itself. I hadn't been special. I had been useful. Every failure, every stubborn decision, every refusal to let go. They weren't flaws. They were variables. And variables, I was beginning to understand, were the only things that could threaten a perfect design. I clenched my fists, not because it would help, but because doing nothing felt like surrender. The glyph beneath my skin stirred, faint but defiant. A reminder that I wasn't just standing here by accident. I told myself he didn't choose me, that whatever pattern he believed in, it had gaps. Because if he truly accounted for everything, then resistance wouldn't even be possible. Defiance felt small in that space, like shouting at a storm. But it mattered. Not to him. To me. Because the moment I stopped pushing back, I would become part of his design. And I refused to be a component in someone else's equation. Even if my resistance was meaningless, it was still mine. The distortion across his form curved, not into a mouth, not into an expression, but into something that carried the idea of a smile. That was worse than anger. Mistakes, he implied, don't repeat this cleanly. They don't echo across timelines. They don't survive correction after correction. I wasn't an accident. I was a pattern that refused to collapse. And that meant he'd been watching longer than I wanted to admit. Every timeline where I hesitated, every version where I failed and tried again, every loop where I made the same choice despite knowing better. I hadn't escaped his notice. I had confirmed his hypothesis. And in that realization, fear shifted shape. Because being unpredictable doesn't make you safe. It makes you interesting. The room dissolved. Stone replaced steel. Sky replaced ceiling. Colossal structures rose from the ground. Machines fused into mountains, veins of light pulsing beneath ancient rock. This wasn't metaphor. This was memory. He showed me the first engine. Not built by hands like ours, but grown into reality. Before language. Before history. Before humanity understood what time even was. I finally understood the truth we'd been dancing around for seasons. We didn't invent time manipulation. We stumbled onto ruins. Everything we called progress was archaeology with better tools. And somewhere along the way, we woke the thing that designed the ruins in the first place. He showed me us next. Early humans. Fragile. Confused. Worshipping storms they couldn't predict. Machines they didn't recognize as machines. They prayed to outcomes. To stability. To survival. And the engines responded. Not with mercy, but with math. We weren't pioneers. We were scavengers mistaking leftovers for destiny. Every breakthrough we celebrated was a rediscovery of something abandoned after it destroyed its creators. That was the pattern. Civilization reaches too far, touches time, breaks itself. Then the ruins wait for the next species arrogant enough to think they're the first. Seraph appeared beside him. Not as a rival, not as an equal, but as something crafted for obedience, a tool given ambition. He wasn't a god. He was a process. Correction without empathy. Evolution without attachment. And then the architect looked at me. Not like he'd finished explaining. Like he'd arrived at the point. Seraph was the instrument. Nova was the anomaly. And I was the variable. The one factor that refused to resolve cleanly. The flaw that kept surviving the equation. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't here to destroy me. He was here to see whether I'd finally justify my existence. Nova flickered again. Two versions of her bled through each other. Out of sync by heartbeats, by futures, by mistakes that never agreed on a single outcome. The architect called it an error. But I'd learned something about errors. They're where systems fail to predict behavior. Where equations lose certainty. Where outcomes stop being clean. She shouldn't exist. Not because she was dangerous, but because she proved something was wrong with his design. Nova wasn't chaos. She was contradiction. And contradiction terrifies anything that survives on order. If Seraph was his scalpel, Nova was the crack in the glass he pretended not to see. And suddenly I understood why she scared him more than I ever could. He showed me the timelines next. They flowed like luminous ribbons through the air. Countless realities branching, colliding, burning away. Some glowed steady. Others ignited red and vanished, erased mid-existence. Not destroyed. Discarded. He didn't hate worlds. He evaluated them. Stability survived. Contradiction died. To him, extinction wasn't violence. It was optimization. Entire civilizations erased not because they were evil, but because they were inefficient. And in that moment, the scale finally landed. This wasn't a war. It was a quality control process. And Earth was failing inspection. I stepped forward before fear could stop me. The pressure crushed my lungs. The air itself resisted my movement. But I needed him to hear it, even if it changed nothing. I told him he was playing God, not creating life, not saving it, editing it, reducing entire histories to data points, and calling the deletion mercy. I wanted anger. I wanted denial. I wanted proof he still felt something. But what I got instead was understanding. And that was worse. Because gods don't get angry when insects accuse them. His eyes brightened, not with rage, but with clarity. He corrected me. He wasn't playing God. He was preventing entropy. That was the word he used. Entropy. As if humanity was a system failure. As if love, conflict, sacrifice, all of it was just noise cluttering an otherwise elegant universe. To him, genocide wasn't cruelty. It was maintenance. And suddenly every erased world made sense. He wasn't cruel enough to hate us. He was distant enough to optimize us out of existence. Then he showed me the future he wanted. Countless Earths gone. No ruins. No screams. Just silence. Perfect cities with no inhabitants. Flawless skies with nothing looking back. No war. No suffering. No choice. Peace, stripped of life. It was quiet because nothing was alive to disturb it. And I realized the truth beneath all his logic. A universe without humanity was easier to manage, cleaner, predictable. And standing there, watching perfection erase everything I loved, I understood something terrifyingly simple. If this was his peace, then I would choose chaos every time. Something inside me pushed back. The glyph burned, not like a command, but like a refusal. The frozen air cracked around my fists. Fractures spider-webbing through a moment that wasn't supposed to move. I told him his peace was wrong. Not inefficient. Not flawed. Wrong. And for the first time since I'd met him, the architect paused. Not because I was strong, but because resistance wasn't in his model. I wasn't supposed to reject inevitability. I wasn't supposed to choose struggle over silence. And in that hesitation, I felt it. A gap. Small. Fragile. But real. He studied me differently after that. Not as a subject. Not as a flaw. But as a question. I resisted prediction. Every future he simulated around me bent. Not enough to break. But enough to wobble. That terrified him. Because systems don't fear power. They fear uncertainty. And I was uncertainty wearing a human face. For the first time, the architect didn't know what came next. And in a universe built on certainty, that made me dangerous. Time snapped back like a rubber band. Nova gasped, really gasped. Air rushing into lungs that hadn't been allowed to breathe. She moved. That alone felt impossible. She said he couldn't see both versions of her at once. that her paradox split his focus. And I saw it. The architect's attention fractured. For a fraction of a second. Enough. Nova wasn't just his blind spot. She was proof that his design had limits. And limits are where empires fall. Nova touched the floor. Reality rippled outward. Not violently, but wrong. The kind of wrong that systems can't correct fast enough. The architect spoke one word. Stop. Not calmly. Not patiently. Urgently. He'd never commanded before. He'd only decided. Now he was reacting. And reaction meant loss of control. For something that designed endings. This was the beginning of fear. Seraph stepped forward. Energy coiled around him like obedience made visible. He didn't wait for instruction. He existed to execute. Correction without hesitation. Judgment without doubt. Even gods delegate violence. And when Seraph raised his hand, I understood the shift. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a demonstration. Not to stop us, but to show the architect. What breaks first? The variable, or the world around it? The blast hit before the sound. One moment I was standing. The next I was airborne. Slammed through frozen debris that hadn't decided whether to exist yet. Pain arrived late, confused. Like time itself didn't know when to hurt me. I shouted Nova's name. Not as a command. As a plea. This wasn't a fight. It was proof. Proof of how easily we could be erased. If the architect chose to stop observing and start correcting. Seraph wasn't trying to kill me. He was teaching a lesson. The architect didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't intervene. He watched. Arms folded behind his back. As if violence were a chart. And I was a data point. Proceed, he said. And I understood. This wasn't punishment. It was evaluation. He wanted to see what failed first. My resolve. My body. Or the idea that humans fight back. To him, suffering was just a diagnostic tool. I shouldn't have been able to stand. My body screamed no. My mind agreed. But something deeper refused. I pushed myself up. Blood floating strangely in the frozen air. The glyph burning like a second heart. I told him he didn't understand humanity. Not angrily. Honestly. Because we don't fight to win. We fight because giving up is worse than dying. And that was something no perfect system could calculate. I showed him. Not with words. With memory. Love that survives loss. Sacrifice without reward. Rebellion with no guarantee of victory. Wars fought knowing they'd be lost. Hands reaching out anyway. We are not efficient. We are not clean. We are not stable. But we endure. Not because we're perfect. Because we choose to keep going. Even when the math says stop. And for the first time, the architect didn't interrupt. Something rippled through him. Not damage. Doubt. A microscopic hesitation. But in a being built on certainty, it was seismic. I will reevaluate, he said. That was it. No apology. No retreat. But reevaluation meant the design wasn't finished. And for one fragile moment, we weren't losing. We weren't winning. We were changing the equation. Nova screamed. And the sound fractured into two voices. Her body split into overlapping silhouettes. Out of sync, tearing in opposite directions. Like reality couldn't agree which version of her deserved to exist. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head. Eyes flickering between futures that hadn't happened yet. This was the price of being impossible. The architect hadn't touched her. He didn't need to. Existing outside design was enough to break her. And watching her collapse, I realized the truth. Hope doesn't survive systems. It threatens them. The architect stepped forward. Space folded beneath his feet, like the universe itself was making room. The variable will be removed. No anger, no malice, just inevitability. In that moment, I felt something colder than fear. Finality. This was the decision point, not just for Nova, but for every timeline that refused to fit neatly into his design. Mercy didn't factor into his calculations, and it never would. Reality screamed. A rift tore open behind us. Violent, unstable, unplanned. Chaos. Beautiful, irrational chaos. Seraph reacted instantly, turning toward the breach. Voice sharp for the first time. No. The architect hadn't created this fracture, and that terrified him. For the first time, design had failed to predict disruption, and that disruption was our only chance. I grabbed Nova. She was lighter than she should have been. Like parts of her were already gone. The rift pulled at us. Memories peeling away. Gravity giving up. The architect spoke again, calm but absolute. You cannot outrun design. He was right. We weren't outrunning it. We were breaking it. As Seraph reached for us, fingers stretching across frozen seconds, we fell. Not forward, not backward, sideways, into the unknown. Darkness swallowed us, then light, then eyes. Not 6, hundreds, thousands. The architect's gaze multiplied across realities, watching every possible outcome at once. Every path now leads back to me. His voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. I held Nova tighter. If every road led to him, then we'd stop following roads. We'd shatter the map itself. You've crossed the rift and seen what waits beyond. Like, share, and subscribe. Your journey through the unknown continues. Epic Outlast.